This is definitely not the creepiest encounter I've experienced, but it has stuck with me since. I, 24 and female, used to go to the smaller university in my city, where I worked as a bartender at the university bar. I also lived about 5 minutes away from campus, which was pretty convenient most of the time for naps between classes, but it lost its touch after this encounter. I usually worked day shifts on days I didn't have any classes. My best friend, Dan, who was 23 and male, also worked with me there. We were really close, so he would hang out during my shift before relieving me most nights. I've known Dan for years, and although a sweetheart, he's often quite oblivious. One day, while Dan was sitting at the bar entertaining me during my shift, a guy sat next to him. The guy seemed normal, around my age, and he wasn't bad looking either. He had blonde, disheveled hair and pretty sculpted muscles. He had also clearly come from a construction site, because he had work boots and a hard helmet hanging from his belt. And this wasn't unusual because we did have a lot of construction near us, and most construction workers in the area were also students at the university. I struck up a conversation with him, going through all of the customer service chit-chat that I was used to saying. When I was busy with another customer, he turned to Dan and started chatting with him. They seemed to get on quite well. However, I could tell every now and again that the man kept sneaking glances at me. It was flattering the first couple of times, and not uncommon as a female bartender, but the longer he did it, I realized there was something about him that was off when he looked at me. Rather than flirtatious, it was like he was watching me, watching exactly what I was doing, where I was going, how I walked, how I greeted people. It was just like he was surveilling me, sizing me up even. This really set me off for the obvious reasons, but also because I've dated a couple of abusive, controlling guys in the past, and the behavior seemed all too familiar. This was the point when he started to loop me in on him and Dan's conversation. He asked if we knew each other. Obvious answer, yes. We had been joking with each other when he first arrived. He then asked how we met and kept asking personal questions about the two of us. I already saw his ramp-up coming a mile away before he asked if we were dating. Dan laughed because we get that all the time. We're really close and very comfortable with each other platonically. Dan, being his obvious self, said no, and that he was dating his girlfriend, whom I adore, but that I was single. I immediately saw a shift in demeanor from the man, who then turned to me to smile. Although a pretty ordinary response, it sent chills down my spine. Many people would just think he was happy to be able to flirt with me freely, but the look in his eyes was telling. He was pleased because he wanted me to himself. Now, to take a step back, I know it seems like a slight overreaction, but trust me, I've seen that type of look many times, and it was frightening as all hell. After that, he started asking me personal questions specifically. I tried to go over to other customers and act busy to avoid them. Sometimes Dan would answer for me, and I swear the dumb kid thought he was wingmanning me, but God, he was wrong. So wrong. The man began the usual questions: how old I was, what I was studying at school, where I was from, all other kinds of normal things, but slightly invading questions as a stranger. Finally, Dan got up to get on shift, which meant that mine was nearly over. Because the guy didn't really do anything out of the norm, I didn't pull Dan aside, just patiently waited until I could leave and have a beer away from the man. As Dan went into the back, the guy turned his sole attention to me. He asked what kind of shows I like to watch, and I half-heartedly answered as I cleaned the bar near him. Suddenly, I looked up and saw his face was inches from mine. He had leaned up onto the bar, and I could literally smell him, that's how close he was. He then asked me if I lived alone. I did at the time, but there was no way in hell I was telling this creep that. So I gulped, shook my head, and said I lived with 2 roommates. I thought adding 2 bodies would deter him. He leaned back down onto his seat and hummed. I saw a gleam in his eye that convinced me he knew that I'd just lied. At this point I was shaking, which was really frustrating and unusual for me, because I often keep up a rather stoic appearance when it comes to creeps. Then with a nod, he got up and put on his jacket. "See you later, Gemma." And then he left, just in time for Dan to come out from the back, the bastard. Dan saw immediately how shaken I was, and asked what was wrong. I could barely respond because the thing was, I'd never introduced myself to the man. I'd forgotten to, and no one around had ever said my name. I know because I asked Dan if anyone had, but he knew my full name. Unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. After that encounter, I was on high alert for about 4 days. I got busy with studying and life stuff though, so it got pushed off to the back of my mind. But not for long. Suddenly I began seeing the man everywhere, in the hallways, near my classes, outside of the bar. A coincidence turned into obvious intent, and I was freaked out. My university was very small, and there was little for me to do to avoid him. My biggest worry was that he had seen the way I walked home, so I started to ask people to drive me even though I lived only 5 minutes away. None of my friends minded, because they're all very solid, which I'm very thankful for. After about 3 weeks of this, I had started to tell my friends, who then started a sort of barrier around me. I was never alone outside of class, and I was always taken home by someone. I started to feel safer, and I had some other shit to deal with, so the guy sort of left my mind again for a bit. During that time, I bought a pair of old-school yellow Vans because I'm a huge fan of retail therapy when I'm feeling depressed or anxious. About 4 days later, I got the notice saying they were out for delivery, and I was pretty excited. I don't usually buzz delivery guys into my building. I often just let them leave a notice so I can pick the package up, but I decided to buzz the guy in this one time, just for the immediate gratification or whatever. Anyway, I had work late and was dropped off home by a friend around 10 p.m. I was exhausted but still stoked to get my Vans and have a very small positive in my life. But when I rounded the corner to my door, my package wasn't waiting for me. This was weird because they always bring your box to your door when it's a private courier, if they're buzzed into the building. I shrugged it off. Maybe the delivery guy hadn't found my door number, or just delivered it to the wrong apartment. I unlocked my door, which seemed to stick a little, which was also weird, but I shrugged that off too. When I opened my door, something immediately felt off. Nothing was out of place per se, but I just felt it. I cautiously stepped into my apartment, gripping my keys between my fingers. My other hand was holding my phone tight, just on the verge of pressing my emergency call button. That's when I turned to the one thing that wasn't there when I left that morning, my package. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, with a note laying right next to it. I started to panic, and raced through my apartment wielding my keys like a pair of claws. My apartment was pretty small, so it was rather easy to sweep it. No one was there, just me, my Vans, and the note. Going into survivor mode, I slammed my door, locked and bolted it, and stuck a chair under the handle for good measure. I checked every window to make sure they were locked, and then my patio door as well, which was a sliding glass door. That's when I found the second thing out of place. The security bar I stick behind my patio door was under my couch, where you would have had to have been crawling to find it. I know it was most definitely stuck behind my patio door when I left that morning. As you can imagine, this freaked me out even more, but I was just glad the bar wasn't broken. I placed it back as tight as possible, and then went straight towards my kitchen counter, where the bastard had left me my present. My package was open. My first thought, strangely enough, was, "Hey, that's illegal," before I reminded myself that the man had literally just broken into my home. My shoes were intact, basically untouched. Next to the box was a handwritten note on one of the sticky pads from my desk in the other room. It read, "Small apartment for 3 people. Enjoy your Vans." Now I'd like to tell you that I called the police and that I got everything sorted out, but that's not how the story ends. In fact, all I did was cry the whole night, and have around 5 panic attacks. The police can't really do much when the guy hasn't done anything malicious, and there was no way for me to trace all of this back to one guy I didn't even know and had never seen since. However, the school term ended right after this, and I didn't have to go to campus until September. I also immediately moved in with my 2 sisters and brother-in-law, so he had very little ways to bother me after that. Holy shit, this just happened, and I'm freaking right the fuck out. I know this is weird, but I take daily walks at nighttime. Not to be creepy or anything, but because I'm a night owl and it just fits my schedule the best. Normally I walk at about 1 or 2 a.m. Tonight I must have left at about 1:30. It's 2:42 right now for reference. It's been cold lately, and I'm all bundled up wearing a hat, mittens, and a coat. The hat I wore tonight isn't the one I normally wear. For some reason I couldn't find it as I was leaving, so I just grabbed something out of my winter clothes bin. I didn't realize that the earmuffs are too close together and really cut my vision off at the periphery. I can't think of a better way to word that. I was really in the zone, walking and thinking about a project I've been working on for a while. I had a stroke of inspiration and was walking fast, trying to keep hold of the idea in my mind and solidify it before I forgot. Meanwhile, I'd walked out of the finished phase of our subdivision and right into the phase that's still currently being built. I do this every night. It's part of my regular route. I was walking past 2 homes that were just in the framing stages a couple of weeks ago and are now covered in plywood and wrapped. They're both covered in white plastic. It was pitch dark out. I don't know if it's a new moon or if it was cloudy, but I definitely couldn't see very well at all. Normally I don't mind this at all. I kind of like the solitude after all. Between the 2 framed houses is a huge dumpster, filled with discarded building materials and a porta-potty, which I assume is for the construction workers. It's been there all winter. Tonight, though, I realized that I was hearing something during my walk. Actually, I didn't notice at first. It wasn't loud, and I was deep in thought when I sort of became aware of it all at once as I neared the dumpster. Every once in a while, I'd hear this weird clicking sound. I had no idea what it was, and I slowed down and strained my eyes to see in the darkness. The dirt lot seemed to be empty, but as soon as I stopped, the sound did as well. I wondered if part of my clothing or shoes was somehow causing the noise. No big deal, after all. I started walking again. About 10 feet past the porta-potty, though, I heard the loud bang of metal behind me, and my heart damn near stopped. Seriously, I almost fell over. It scared me so bad. Before that, it had been completely dark out and totally silent. The bang was just so sudden and loud. I swung around to see the door of the porta-potty swinging slightly. Jesus fucking Christ. I started running. Unfortunately, my legs carried me further into the construction area along my regular walking route instead of back the way I'd come. I realized while I was running that this was wildly stupid because I was walking right into a dead end and would have to eventually turn around and walk right past that same porta-potty. I clutched the phone in my coat pocket and was mentally screaming when it occurred to me that I was running the wrong way and I had to turn around. That's also when I realized that I was holding my husband's phone, and if I wanted to use it, I'd have to stop and log in with a password. My battery was almost dead, so I'd grabbed his as I left. I'd never needed to use a phone on a walk before this, and I honestly never thought it would matter. After a bit, I just stopped running. I kept going along my usual route, glancing uncomfortably over my shoulder every few feet. By the time I got to the end of the road, I'd managed to convince myself that I'd heard an animal hiding out in the outhouse. I turned around and started walking back. Honestly, I was petrified. I've never been so afraid, even though I knew it was probably all in my head. As I neared the construction site, I walked so slowly it felt like my legs were wooden, and I was just sort of dragging myself into the darkness towards the dumpster by sheer force of will. I'm having a hard time trying to find the words to convey how frightened I was. I had to keep going, though. and somehow I was doing it. I strained my eyes into the darkness, trying to catch movement or make any shapes that seemed off or out of place. I didn't hear or see anything, but suddenly I became more terrified than ever. A wave of alarm just swept over my entire body. I became immediately convinced and had a strong feeling that someone or something was watching me. I was sure of it. I've never felt anything so strongly or deeply in my life. I was walking on the far side of the road, as far from the dumpster and outhouse as I could get. Fear and this unbelievable feeling of fight or flight was making me almost frantic with a fever I can still taste. Somehow I made it past the two houses and was turning onto the T intersection where the new development phase meets the finished construction, still walking on the far side at a snail's pace, bent sideways at the waist and neck so that my eyes never left the porta-potty. I couldn't see through my hat very well though. The ears on the dang thing kept brushing my eyes and really limited my field of vision. Then, holy shit, I couldn't even believe what happened. The houses that border the newer construction put up a fence, a long, unbroken, continuous white fence, except for this one spot, an alcove for the power meter box things. The neighbors who'd erected the fence had either wanted to exclude them from their backyards because they're a big ugly eyesore, or allow easy access to the power company. They left them on the outside of the fence by jogging around them. So now in the dark, almost to the lit, safe populated area of my route, I had to pass this dark alcove. I was overcome with a feeling of even stronger dread. The feeling of being watched was so strong now that the hair on my entire body was standing erect. I'd never felt so threatened. I took a deep breath. I told myself, stop being stupid. That I was going to tell this story to my husband when I got home, and we'd all have a laugh about my paranoia later with friends. When about halfway past the dark cave cut into the white vinyl fence, I saw someone stand up from behind the power box. Even though I sort of halfway expected this, shock and surprise stopped me dead. I actually started screaming, but I was so scared nothing came out of my mouth but air. My hat covered one of my eyes, and I was trying to yank the phone out of my pocket. For some reason, my legs had stopped working altogether. I guess so I could focus on squeezing the sides of my phone in a death grip and hysterically screaming, "Flashlight on!" Thank God the flashlight turned on from the lock screen. I then started running so fast that my top half couldn't keep up with the way my legs had turned and begun to sprint. I actually fell down about 3 feet from the recessed niche in the fence where the thing was. I picked myself up and ran faster than I ever have in my life. Propelled by absolute panic, I didn't look back once. I'm sitting here typing this and hysterically crying out of relief and fear. I'm home and safe, and now I realize that whoever was out tonight using a porta-potty in the dark, unfinished street knows where I live. It's 3:40 now, and I can't stop checking the window. I don't see anything, and typing this hasn't calmed me down at all. My fingers are still cold and stiff from being outside, and I know this is riddled with mistakes, but I tried to share the story as best and quickly as I could. I don't know who else is online at 3 a.m., but I'm seriously, truly afraid. Who the fuck was that? "3 years ago, I was living with my then-boyfriend in a one-bedroom apartment in a little mountain town. It was a half-basement unit, so the bottom of all of our windows were level with the ground outside. It was also an older apartment, so not all of the windows could fully lock. One day, my boyfriend comes home from work while I'm laying on the sofa. Immediately, he runs up to the window near me and looks out of it frantically. He then goes to look out every other window in the house. He walked around outside, just looking in through all of the windows. When he came back from this confusing exploit, I asked him what the fuck was going on, and why he was being such a spaz. "I think I just walked up on a dude looking in the window at you. He took off as I walked up," he told me. This was naturally very unsettling, but after discussing it and considering the time of day, about 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and the number of people out and about around the complex at the time, we came to the conclusion that it must have been just a curious neighbor, or someone who happened to be passing by and glance in. With that, we forgot about it. If only that was the end. For the next couple of months, odd stuff started to happen here and there. Someone would knock on the door occasionally, then when I would go to answer, no one would be there. I'd find little things in my apartment that I wasn't familiar with, or things like clothing items would suddenly vanish. I didn't really think twice about any of it, until one night. My boyfriend and I were arguing, around 1 or 2 in the morning, and we were being a little loud. We were standing in the kitchen face to face. His back was to an open window with the blinds up halfway, and I was facing towards it. Amidst our arguing, I glanced behind him at the window, thinking I saw the reflection of my face in it. The window was open, though. It wasn't my face. There was a man with his face pressed up almost against the window screen, watching us fight. And given the fact that we were arguing and it was late, I thought for a moment that it might have been a concerned neighbor walking up to the window to speak to us. A main walkway for the complex was right on the other side of the window after all, so I spoke to him. "Hello, can I help you?" I asked a little aggressively, thinking a neighbor was intruding on our privacy. The man responded to this by staring, unwavering and cold, right at me. His face didn't change expression at all. He didn't even blink or move, just looked right at me in a way I've never been looked at before or since. In this instant, I also realized that because of the window being level with the ground, the only way this man's face could be where it was if he was laying on the ground outside the apartment, or crouched and contorted to look into the window. My heart sank. I buried my face in my boyfriend's chest and closed my eyes in fear. My boyfriend, up to this point, thought that I was messing with him. When I buried my face in his chest, only then did he say, "Is there really someone at the window?" I whispered yes to him. He felt my fear and took a moment before he turned around. By the time he did, though, the man was already gone. At this point, I started to think about all the little odd occurrences that I'd been experiencing. I assumed the worst right away. I filed the police report with his description, and my brother loaded my apartment up with weapons to protect me, or at least inform this peeping Tom that I was armed now. After that night, myself, my boyfriend, and my brother were all on high alert. There were a few times when my brother came over that he saw a sketchy man hanging around, and one time even saw him looking through my window. He tried to discreetly follow the man, but he took off running every time as soon as my brother stepped in his direction. The last night I had an experience with this man, I was sitting at home alone on my sofa. My boyfriend was at work at a restaurant about 2 blocks away. He had picked me up from work about an hour earlier. We sat on the sofa together a little while when we got home. He kissed me and left for work, locking the door behind him. After he left, I continued to sit on the couch on Reddit for a while in silence, but after about an hour of me just sitting there, I heard a door slowly creak open. It's a small apartment, so to see the bedroom and bathroom doors from the couch, all I had to do was lean a little bit to the left. I assumed it was one of my cats coming out of the bedroom, so you could imagine my shock when I leaned over and saw the door that's opening as the door to the water heater closet and small storage space. I looked to my right and saw both of my cats sleeping soundly at the other end of the couch. I looked back to the door, and it was still creaking open very slowly. It opened enough for me to see it. A set of fingers wrapped around the door, easing the door open ever so gently to try and open it as quietly as possible. This was gonna be a no from me, dog. I ran my ass barefooted out the door, into the snow and down the street to my boyfriend's work. I called the cops right away. When everyone went back to check out the apartment, he was of course long gone. After that, my boyfriend and I packed up our shit, went to stay with my parents, and about 6 months later moved 1,000 miles away from that town. That was the end of it. Initially, I found this sub around that time, as I was trying to find other stories similar to mine or people to talk to who had experienced something like I did. I intended to write my story here eventually, and I figured after this week's events I had to. I live 1,000 miles away from where this all happened, so a part of me thinks there's no way this person could have found me. But last week, I heard a knock on the front door of my apartment. I was expecting a package at the time, so I figured it was the delivery driver. I didn't answer. I'd go to get the package later. They knocked again, and again. The third one made me uneasy, so I waited a good 20 minutes to check the door. When I did, there was no package, no note, nothing. Someone was just knocking. Although it made me uneasy, I didn't initially think about my stressful experience in my last town. Then 2 days ago, I went out to get groceries. I have a little patio, and I go out there in the mornings to just chill or check on plants a lot. I've been known to leave it unlocked in the day on accident. Never thought of it as a huge deal, until I came home from the store 2 days ago, and the deadbolt to my apartment was locked. The deadbolt that can only be locked from the inside, period. I assumed someone had robbed me, because I dumbly left my patio unlocked. I called my sister, my current new boyfriend, and I waited for people to be with me. I went into my apartment through the sliding glass door. Nothing was out of place. Nothing of value was taken. At this point, my heart sank. Nothing had been touched at all. Nothing stolen. Someone was inside my apartment just because they wanted to be inside. I told my boyfriend about my stalker, and he's not taking this shit lightly like my past boyfriend. I filed the police report. We checked for recording devices and cameras. He put up these Nest cameras all over the place, and we're all on high alert. I truly hope this is a coincidence, but if this man really followed me across multiple state lines, there's no one on this earth I'm less interested in meeting.